Hey, what's up? It's me again. Most of the stuff I post online is hard surface and mech stuff, it says it in the name, but recently a bunch of people have been asking me if modeler and VR is also good for organic sculpting, and turns out it is. So today I figured I'd show you how to do a cool organic sculpt in modeler. We're gonna make a cool flower and centipede thing, and it's actually tattooed on my arm right here. So without further ado, let's get started. The way I'm approaching this sculpt is based on Geo Nakpil's workflow. He's the one that pioneered this whole technique, so if you want to learn more about it, check out his stuff, it's great. And I'm also using my own brush set that I made way back in the day for medium. It still works just as well in modeler. I'm gonna link everything in the description as usual. But the best piece of advice I can give you for organic sculpting in modeler is to make a ton of layers. The more layers you make, the more control you have over your shapes and your forms. If you try to approach it like surface sculpting like ZBrush or Blender, you're gonna have a bad time, because it turns out modeler is a different program, so it works in a different way. You can also sculpt on the surface of objects, but since modeler is voxel based, to have really sharp details like you would in ZBrush, you would need every single layer to be crazy high res. So if you're coming from a traditional 3D software and you're trying to make the jump to VR or just try it out, you kind of have to rewire your brain to think in a different way and approach sculpting with a different technique, because it's a different medium. So you can see me here, every time I try to make a different form, I make a new layer, I sculpt the form, and then once I'm happy with it, I merge it down and I smooth it out. That way I have a lot of control over what shapes I make. Whenever I see people struggle online with modeler, it's because they try to make everything onto one layer and they're trying to freehand every shape as well. The same is true for hard surface, but it's even more apparent for organic sculpting. Once you merge stuff together and you smooth it out, you have a lot more control over the transitions between the form. You could, in theory, sculpt everything onto one layer, but it would be extremely difficult. If you look at Geo's videos, you'll notice that for every shape that he places, he'll just make a blob and then stretch it out to have the form that he wants. That's a way to get even more control over the form. Once you get a bit more confidence and are able to make decisive brushstrokes, you can sketch out the actual shape that you want and then refine it, which is my preferred way of working. I just find it a bit more dynamic and gestural if you want, but it requires more practice and confidence in your movements. So if you're a beginner, make a ton of layers, stretch them out, place them exactly where you want on your model, and once you're happy, you can merge everything down. Right now I'm sculpting one segment of the centipede's body, which is gonna get repeated a whole bunch. So I'm just making sure that each part can interlock nicely with the next. Once the base segment feels solid, I move on to making the head. I'm building the head the same way I did the body. I'm duplicating a bunch of layers and then stretching them into place. It's all about building volume piece by piece. For the mandibles, I'm actually reusing some of the segments of the legs. Not only is it efficient, but it also helps keep the shape language unified and consistent across the whole design. By working this way, it feels like everything kind of belongs together. Using the same approach for the antennas, I sculpt a single segment, I duplicate it, and I stretch it. That way I can get a tapered form. The tip of the antenna ends up looking much thinner than the base. I use modeler's repetition tools to my advantage. That way I can make stuff look really complex with minimal effort. For the eyes, I'm going with something simple, so I'm sculpting just the orbit of the eyes and then placing some spheres into them. This whole centipede I'm making, I'm not trying to make it realistic. It is a bit stylized. It's more about giving some kind of personality to this bug. You can draw some parallels with the way I'm approaching mech sculpting. It's not about making the perfect functional thing or accurate representation of an insect. It's about expressing some kind of mood or energy. And that mood for this piece is kind of gross but beautiful at the same time. So I'm trying to make something that's elegant but also a bit disturbing. Centipedes, love them or hate them, it's hard to be indifferent. They always trigger some kind of reaction in people. That's part of why I chose this as a subject for the sculpt. The shapes themselves, they build a lot of tension. You don't need to push it very far to make it feel unsettling. And then combining this with a flower, it brings an interesting contrast. Starting to assign some color, just to be able to differentiate the elements better. All the heavy lifting for the texture is going to be done later on in Keyshot. But for now, I just want to see the overall vibe of it. And if you're wondering how I duplicate stuff really quick like this, or what tools I'm using, what buttons do I press, I suggest that you check out the beginner's guide that's on the channel. I covered most, if not all, of the technical aspects in previous videos, so for these ones, it's more about design process, how I approach making certain shapes, or what am I thinking about when I design something like this. Here's a good example where the layer-based workflow really shines. I'm adding a trim element to the carapace, but I'm able to deform it and modify it without touching the base segment that I'm already happy with. It's a non-destructive way to build some complexity into the design, and it helps keeping everything readable and distinct. Moving on to the tail section of the centipede. I'm grabbing a segment and I'm stretching it a little bit. I'm using part of the leg as a base, and I'm basically doing the same thing I did with the antennas, but just with longer segments. I'm inflating both ends of the segment to make sure that they connect well with each other, duplicating them and scaling them at the same time so I get a nice tapered effect. And then using my move tool, I make the end to a point to get a nice, sharp, pointy, mean-looking shape. And that's our centipede pretty much done. I could refine this further, but I'm gonna move on into making the flowers. I'm doing a stylized version of a spider lily, which goes well with our theme with the centipede because both of them are super poisonous. I start by creating a cross-section of a single petal, and I'm leaving a bunch of 3D artifacts from the sculpting on purpose so that it creates a bunch of texture when I stretch it out. Once the cross-section feels right, I stretch it to form the full length of the petal, and I use the elastic move tool to keep the shape nice and curvy. It gives a very natural and flowy result. It's a super simple base, but once we start layering all of these petals together with the centipede, it's gonna be really complex. And for the stem, here I could make a lot of layers, but I'm pretty confident with the shapes that I want, so I draw all of them together. I push the petals around so that I get a form that feels natural. I then draw the filament part of the flower. It takes me a couple of tries because I get some stepping in my brush. That's due to the layer being too high res, so I drop the resolution of the layer so that my brush stroke is nice and fluid. And I'm using the move tool to arrange the filaments in a way that feels very elegant. Making the stem, I'm trying to contrast the shapes that's happening on top of the flower with something that feels a bit more jagged and aggressive. I try to get the thickness of the stem just right so that it feels like it can support the flower. And again, I'm trying to be very gestural with my brush stroke. And whatever I can't get right the first time, I use my move tool to place it exactly where I want. And I'm using a petal that I previously sculpted that I deform to make a leaf. And that's our flower pretty much done. Now we can see how the centipede and the flower interact together. I start to move stuff around, but I also know that I'm gonna make a much more complex and intricate composition. So now that everything is sculpted, we can move on to composition. I'm just trying to find a pose that makes the centipede and the flower elements feel like part of one structure. On a low resolution layer, I sketched the general shape or gesture that I want the centipede to have. I'm keeping it very loose and energetic. I want it to wrap around a central stem element. And once I have the general gesture down, I duplicate the segments of the centipede to follow that curve. While I'm doing this, I'm thinking about the general balance of the piece, the rhythm, and the silhouette that it's gonna have. Even now, I'm working in layers. I'm adjusting the pieces one by one until it all feels kind of connected. Since this is all in 3D, the composition has to work from every angle, not just the front. I know that I'm gonna render a turntable and not just a single static image to really showcase how all the elements flow together. A lot of time is gonna be spent on tweaking each element and posing them together, making sure nothing intersects. The sculpting part was pretty straightforward, but this requires a lot of attention and care to make sure that everything meshes well together. This is where our sculpt is gonna really shine, because it's not about just having a single focal point. The viewer should be able to rotate it around and always find something interesting to look at. And to get a clear sense of direction, I use a straight line to wrap every element around. I'm channeling my inner florist, trying to get a delicate flower arrangement, but with a sick bug in it. It's all about the balance of the piece, how it flows together, thinking about the negative space of the piece a lot too, and how the really aggressive bug shapes and the delicate flower contrast together. We're getting really artsy with this piece, trying to invoke emotion and trying to make something beautiful. Once we have our general arrangement done, I'm gonna spend a lot of time tweaking everything, adjusting every segment of the centipede and adjusting every segment of each leg. I don't want them floating around or clipping through stuff. Each one needs to be connected to something, or at least sit nicely in relation to each other. Some legs are going to be wrapped around the stem or grabbing onto a leaf or a petal. I want the whole thing to feel very intentional, even if it feels kind of chaotic. This is where VR really shines too, because compared to a traditional 3D software, it's just so much easier to move around the sculpt and getting close and adjust things really quickly. Weaving forms together and nudging petals, placing legs. It all feels very intuitive when you're right there in the space with it. You're not just dragging a gizmo around on a flat screen, like you're sculpting something like you would in real life. You can make yourself really small and get into nooks and crevices. It's fast, it's precise, and it keeps the whole process very playful. For this sculpt, I chose to do a bug because it still feels mechanical to me, like it's still joints and segments, and I can break it down in a very logical way. Plus, it looks sick. But hopefully you can extrapolate this to your own designs and really see how you can apply those techniques to, let's say, a face or another animal or a character or anything you want to. I chose flower and bug because I really love those elements together. For those wondering if this is going to become a flower channel, don't worry, we'll go back to some crazy mech stuff soon enough. Although if I could rebrand and live off my flower sculpting, I'd also be happy with that. For some reason, people online seem to enjoy more crazy ass mechs than some, beautiful looking flowers. But hey, I'm gonna keep doing what I enjoy doing, and nothing's gonna stop me from that. If you made it this far into the video, well, thanks for watching and hanging out through the whole process. Feel free to drop on by the Discord and show me what you made in VR. Would it be hard surface or organic sculpting? I'm always super down to see what people make with Modeler and VR. It's such a fun tool and hopefully kind of unlocks your creativity the same way it did for me. I don't think we'll make this sculpt 3D printable. It would be amazing, but it would also be a fucking nightmare to do all the supports for this. So for now, it's just gonna live as a beautiful sculpture on the internet. If you wanna support me or the channel, feel free to check out the Patreon. There's plenty of cool mech stuff to print on there. Thanks for hanging out. Hopefully you had fun. Maybe learned something. Let me know in the comments what you would like to see next, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.